Breaking news. The list of unanticipated results from a war is long. I was born and raised in Russia, and like many Soviet families, my ancestry spans the globe. However, the social cracks that Putin's invasion of Russia, Ukraine, and Canada caused will remain long after he has left office. My dad's family, for instance, all hails from Ukraine, where he was born and raised. Although he has Ukrainian family ties, he and my mother now reside in Moscow, where they are constantly exposed to pro-war propaganda. Both are highly educated, so it surprises me that they would accept Moscow's story without questioning it. It's no secret that all the channels transmit exclusively official narratives during the war, and that's where my parents and many other Russians their age get their news. Consequently, many people have come to accept this skewed version of events as the truth. The media constantly reminds Russians of the dangers posed by both foreign and domestic foes, and this has contributed to a climate of dehumanizing othering in Russia. For instance, a Russian television weather forecaster gleefully described how clear skies over Syria would help the Russian Air Force bomb opposition ground targets in 2015, when the Kremlin intervened in Syria to support Bashar al-Assad. Since I left Russia in 2016, the number of political talk shows has tripled, and most of them are hosted by people who constantly mock the Ukrainian people despite the fact that they are still under constant attack. Instead of initially portraying the war as liberating Ukrainians from Nazis, the media now portrays all Ukrainians as Nazis. I can't have rational conversations about the war with people who back Russia's invasion of Ukraine. First and foremost, I see this conflict as a war between two sister nations that Vladimir Putin is solely responsible for igniting. Even though we know it will only lead to more arguments, talking about the fighting with friends and family is often unavoidable. I feel like my Putin-supporting friends and family are living in a fantasy world that they are unable to question. Many Russians today see the world in stark binary terms. Since the invasion of 2022, our domestic and international relationships have been defined by the question of which side each individual supports. There is no longer any friendship. Relationships have broken up. The family has cut off all communication. The people inside Russia who do not support the war are the most vulnerable. As soon as the war broke out, those who were able to fled Russia for the former Soviet republics and other nearby countries like Turkey and Mongolia. When it was announced that there would be partial conscription, another wave of people fled, likely out of fear for their lives if they were sent to the front lines. It seems that the idea of even partial mobilization proved to be more shocking to the population than the outbreak of the war. However, due to a lack of documentation, many are compelled to return to Russia. Since the invasion began, nearly 20,000 Russians have been arrested in over 243 different municipalities, as reported by OVD Info. Unspeakable police brutality is used against those who protest the war, effectively silencing public protest. In private life as well, Russians face a climate of denunciation reminiscent of the Soviet era. Many anti-war journalists, human rights activists, and political activists have reported having their homes vandalized with pro-war, Z, and V signs. Some speculate that members of Russian neo-Nazi groups are responsible, which would be ironic in and of itself. It's understandable that anti-war voices have gone silent in the absence of an impartial judicial system. Obviously, the devastation in Ukraine is far worse than what Russian families are going through both abroad and at home. I, a Russian citizen living abroad, carry the weight of shame and guilt for a war in which I had no part. I've never liked Putin, and I left Russia when I realized what was happening there under his rule. Since so many have been beaten or self-censored into silence about the situation in Russia and among its people, I feel compelled to speak out about it here and in the talks I've been giving. The war has also caused divisions at home. My daughter was told by peers in February of last year that they despised Russia and all Russians. She felt assured enough to state that one man was ultimately responsible for the war. A pro-Russian Canadian classmate told the son of Ukrainian friends that Russia was a great nation and that Ukraine was to blame for the war. Given the ages of the kids involved, it's safe to assume that their parents were the source of the signals. Last year, red paint was thrown at St. Sophia's Orthodox Church in Victoria. The following day, yellow and blue paint was found on the doors of the Russian Community Center in Vancouver. After receiving a number of racist threats, the Russian Spoon Bakery in Vancouver was forced to cover the word Russian on its sign. These places of worship, community centers, and shops serve the spiritual and material needs of both Russians and Ukrainians, which is a sad reality that the perpetrators of these attacks seem to ignore. With everything that's happening in Russia right now, I find myself wondering why there aren't any international refugee or immigration programs tailored to regular Russians looking to flee Putin's regime. It's safe to assume that many Canadians' initial reaction would be, "So what?" Even though we knew this long before February 2022, my short answer would be that Putin is one of the worst human rights abusers on the planet, right up there with Bashar al-Assad and Kim Jong-un. Wouldn't letting them in be yet another sign of how far Russia's international standing has declined? Of course, it is difficult to know how many people, even if they could, would try to leave Russia at this time. It has been speculated that, behind the facade of a declarative pro-war majority, there is significant opposition to Putin and the war, based on the limited amount of polling data that has been made public so far. 2 days after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, an anti-war petition garnered over 1.2 million signatures, suggesting the magnitude of this opposition. The question on everyone's mind, including that of the Russians, is how soon this war will end. The recent coup attempt led by Prigozhin may be the first sign that Putin is not invincible. Maybe cracks have started to show up in his life, and the end is near. The rifts in society that he has helped widen through his war will persist long after he is gone.